Our next key concept is one which, again, we've mentioned before, both in previous modules, but also in this particular concept here. And that comes out of the Mosaic covenant. Because in the Mosaic covenant, we have a symbol of what Moses was about. And that symbol, of course, is the Ten Commandments. He brings the Ten Commandments down from the mountain, and as he brings it down, he then presents that to the people. Now, the Ten Commandments, we get excited about the Ten Commandments. We start getting all excited about 10 commandments, that how many commandments are there? There are 10. And of course, the only people who think that there are 10 commandments are Christians. And part of the reason for that is because of our misunderstanding of Tanakh. Now, the first form of Tanakh, or the first part of Tanakh, is Torah. And Torah consists out of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's Tanakh, or that's Torah. In Greek, it's known as Pentateuch. But all 5 of those constitute for the Jews the law. Now, when we think of the law, we often think of the police or lawyers. And when we think of police and lawyers, often what we think of is jail. No, he's not very happy. So someone in jail, because that's what we're trying to avoid when we come into contact with the law. But that would be the very wrong understanding of law in terms of Tanakh. The Tanakh was not meant to be a jail, which was meant to hold us in or keep us in or stop us from doing something. Because in fact what that does is it gives us slavery. But straight away, if you read Tanakh, you realize that the whole story of the Tanakh was to actually give people freedom, not slavery. Yet freedom without any rules or without any laws is not freedom at all. That's just chaos. So where do we find the middle road between chaos and slavery? Well, essentially, we find it in the law or the Torah. A better translation of Torah is instruction. And essentially, it's the instruction. It's the way in which we are to live the life, the way in which we are to go through it. Essentially, what Torah are guidelines for doing just that. And so what the rabbis did was they went through Torah and identified all the commands that are within Torah. And when you look at all the commands, you don't get 10, but you actually get 613 commands. In Hebrew, it's mitzvot. 613 mitzvot. And those mitzvot are the things that you need to look at in terms of how one lives the guidelines of life. Now, we need to realize that that's the concept. It's not wanting to give us slavery. It's not wanting to give us absolute freedom, which is chaos. It wants to give us something in the middle. And what's it in the middle? Well, what it wants to do is to give us a boundary. It's the boundary fence of life. It's the boundary fence of how we live our lives. And what it's wanting to say is that what we are, again, we're actually happy about that, is that we are in midst of a boundary where we have all the freedom, but up to a boundary, up to the boundary fence. And what the mitzvah are there for, what the laws, the commandments are there for, is to provide us with that boundary fence. When we live inside the boundary, we live within God's blessing. But when we step over the boundary, we step into a place without God and therefore into His curse. And when you look at the Tanakh, we always need to see that. That is not saying that we're bound up behind bars, where God is saying, no, you can't do that, well, I'm going to punish you, so I'm going to put you in jail. But no, it's rather wanting to say, I've given you all this freedom, but up to boundaries. And if you live within the freedom that I've given you, you will live within my blessing. But as soon as you step outside those boundaries, then you're going to live within my curse. Because I'm not there to bless you, to care for you, to encourage you, to be in relationship with you. So when we see law, when we see books like Leviticus, when we see the other books of Deuteronomy and Numbers, let's not read them as being rules that we have to follow. And if you don't follow those rules, then you are immediately going to be punished. Instead, let's rather see the law as an instruction, as the guidelines which give us freedom within the boundaries of God.